Imagine this. You're sitting in a quiet room, staring at a number on your screen. Not your bank balance this time, but what you owe. It's small at first, almost harmless. Maybe it's a credit card bill from a few purchases you didn't think twice about. You tell yourself it's temporary. You'll clear it next month. It doesn't feel like a problem. In fact, it almost feels normal. Everyone uses credit. Everyone carries a little balance sometimes. Life continues. Nothing changes. But something invisible has already started shifting, because the moment you owe money, even a small amount, your relationship with your future begins to change. A part of your tomorrow is no longer fully yours. It's already been promised away. At this early stage, debt doesn't feel heavy. It feels manageable, even useful. It gives you access to things before you fully earn them. Convenience replaces patience. You start living slightly ahead of your actual income, and the difference feels small enough to ignore. But the human mind adapts quickly. What once felt like an exception slowly becomes a habit. The next time you need something, using credit feels easier, not risky, just efficient. And this is how the first level of debt quietly becomes part of your lifestyle, not through one big decision, but through many small, reasonable ones. Then life moves forward. The numbers grow, not dramatically at first, but enough to notice. The balance doesn't disappear next month like you expected. It carries over. Then it carries again. Now there's interest involved. Still manageable, but no longer invisible. You begin to feel a subtle shift in your thinking. When you receive your paycheck, it doesn't feel entirely like yours anymore. A portion of it already has a destination before you even decide what to do with it. This is where debt begins changing behavior, not loudly but consistently. You hesitate slightly before spending. You calculate more often. You start thinking in terms of obligations instead of options. And then there's another level, a deeper one. This is where debt becomes structural. Maybe it's a car loan. Maybe it's education. Maybe it's something that felt necessary at the time, something that made sense. And often it does make sense. But the emotional experience changes again, because now the timeline of your life begins to stretch around your debt. Months turn into years. Payments become routine. The number becomes part of your identity in a quiet way. You don't think about it constantly, but it's always there in the background, shaping your decisions. Job choices feel different when you have obligations waiting every month. Risk feels different. Freedom feels different. At the highest levels, debt stops feeling like a number and starts feeling like weight. Not just financial weight, but psychological weight. It influences how you see opportunities. It affects how long you stay in situations that don't serve you. It quietly limits how far you're willing to step outside your comfort zone, because every decision is filtered through one underlying question: can I afford the consequences if this goes wrong? And that question changes everything. It makes people more cautious, more controlled, sometimes more trapped than they realize, not because they lack ability, but because their financial structure doesn't allow for flexibility. Around this point, it's worth pausing for a moment. If you're watching this and recognizing parts of your own experience in these stages, you're on Prime Gorilla, where we break down the deeper psychology behind money, debt, and financial freedom. If this perspective is opening your eyes, take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who feels stuck in their financial situation, and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Because once you zoom out, something important becomes clear. Debt is not just a financial tool, it's a timeline trade. You are exchanging future time and freedom for present access, and depending on how that trade is structured, it can either support your growth or quietly limit it. The world often presents debt in simple categories: good debt, bad debt. But the real difference is not just in what the debt is used for, it's in how it affects your ability to move through life. Some forms of debt expand your future options, others compress them. And most people don't fully understand which one they're dealing with until they feel the consequences over time.
What makes this more complex is human behavior, because debt rarely accumulates through irrational decisions. It builds through reasonable ones. A small purchase here, a necessary expense there, a decision made under pressure, a moment where convenience feels more valuable than waiting. Each choice makes sense individually, but together they create a structure that begins shaping your life. And once that structure is in place, it doesn't just sit there. It actively influences your future decisions. It narrows your margin for error. It reduces your ability to take risks. It quietly turns your financial life into something more rigid than you intended. And this is where the deeper realization begins to form. The true cost of debt is not just the interest you pay, it's the flexibility you lose. It's the opportunities you hesitate to take. It's the time you spend maintaining a system instead of building something new. Because in a world that is constantly changing, flexibility is one of the most valuable financial assets you can have. And debt, depending on how it's structured, can either support that flexibility or take it away. So what do you do with that understanding? Not in a step-by-step sense, but in a broader way. You begin to see debt differently, not as something to simply eliminate or ignore, but as something to design carefully. You start asking a different question, not just can I afford this, but what does this commit my future to? Because every form of debt creates a version of your future that you are agreeing to in advance. And the more aware you are of that, the more intentional your decisions become. Over time, something shifts. Instead of reacting to debt, you start controlling it. Instead of letting it define your options, you begin reshaping your structure to regain flexibility. The numbers may not change overnight, but your relationship with them does. And that relationship is what ultimately determines how debt affects your life. And here's the final perspective shift that brings everything together. Debt is not just about money. It's about control over your time, your decisions, and your direction in life. At low levels, it feels invisible. At moderate levels, it feels manageable. At high levels, it feels heavy. But at every level, it is quietly shaping the path you can take. The people who truly master their financial lives are not necessarily those who avoid debt completely. They are the ones who understand its weight, respect its impact, and structure their lives in a way that keeps their future as open as possible. Because in the end, wealth is not just about what you own, it's about how free you are to choose what comes next. If this video changed the way you see debt and your relationship with it, then you're already thinking at a different level.
If this video opened your eyes, make sure you subscribe, because what you learn today can save your future tomorrow.